Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Fueling Collaboration. I always get so excited to host these discussions because they're always just such fascinating opportunities to hear from really inspiring people. Welcome again. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Andrea Brandon, and I am a science delivery specialist with the Northern Research Station, and it's my absolute privilege to be hosting today's discussion. So before we get started, we do have a quick poll set up. Eric, would you mind launching our poll, please? Perfect. So folks should see a poll here, and we just have a couple of questions. And this poll just helps us get a sense of who's with us today and where you're coming from. So we'll just keep this poll open for about another minute or so. And we've got 3 questions. So what best describes your work? Where are you physically located? And then how'd you hear about us today? So it looks like we've got about 50% of folks have responded. We'll give it just another couple of seconds here. Really appreciate everyone answering this poll. So we're gonna close it out in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's close the poll and we can share results. And it looks like we've got a pretty diverse group of folks here today. So a good mix of managers, fire practitioners, some researchers, and a pretty good mix of folks of where everyone's located. A lot of people coming here from the Midwest and Northeast. We've got some representation from Western states, and wow, we've got a handful of folks that are calling in from international locations. And it looks like people have heard about this Fueling Collaboration panel discussion series through the Fire Science Exchange Network newsletters, as well as from the Northern Research Station. So really, again, thank you so much, everyone, for that poll. So Fueling Collaboration is a panel discussion series that's presented by the Joint Fire Science Program, Fire Science Exchange Networks, the Northern Research Station, and the Southern Research Station. This is our 4th season offering Fueling Collaboration. And if you've joined us before, welcome back. And if this is your first time, we really hope that you enjoy the structure and the style of this panel discussion and this series that we've curated for you guys. So our goal with Fueling Collaboration is to bring researchers and land managers together to learn about and to discuss the latest in fire science and application, and to build collective learning opportunities across the region. So today is the last of our discussions for this season, but fear not, we'll be back next year. So in prior years, we have discussed a wide variety of topics, from fire history and its application in present day management, opening the burn window, smoke management, prescribed fire in the WUI, just to name a few. And for all of our discussions, we've used a similar format to what you're going to see today. So no PowerPoint presentations, built on the questions that you've submitted in advance. And we really strive to have a bit of a casual feel for this conversation. So we do welcome you to view some of the past recordings. And if we'll throw a link into the chat for the Fueling Collaboration website where you can view all of those past recordings. So before we jump into our topic today, just have a couple logistical points to go over. So one, our webinar is recorded, and this recording will be available on the Fueling Collaboration website. Closed captioning is available, so if that's needed, just on the bottom of your screen, you should see a little CC. Click on that for closed captioning. This discussion is approved for 1.5 Category 1 CFEs by the Society of American Foresters. and we will be submitting the participant list to SAF for those continuing ed credits. And so go through that participant list, and just if you are seeking continuing ed credits, just make sure that your first and last name are correct in that participant list. And if not, you can change your name. So next to your name, you should see a couple little dots. Just click on that, and a drop down that says rename is there. And just please type in your first and last name, again, because we will be using that to submit to SAF. All participants are muted because we do have a large group with us today, but the chat is open, and we do strongly encourage folks to use the chat. And you'll see that we'll be throwing quite a few links in other resources into the chat as well. So we encourage that open dialogue, but just ask you to keep it on point and keep it respectful. So want to, let's see here, our topic for today, successfully bridging the gap, Eastern US models of fire science and management collaboration. So this panel discussion, we've got a great set of panelists that are with us, and they'll be speaking about different case studies across the Eastern US where land managers and scientists have forged pioneering partnerships. And our moderator for today's discussion is Dr. Nick Skowronski. And Nick is a research forester and project leader within the Northern Research Station. And he leads the physical and ecological fire processes, interactions, and applications research work unit. Really pleased that we have Nick here as a moderator. Before I pass it off to Nick, though, just want to acknowledge the organizers of Fueling Collaboration. Those folks listed here representing the different organizations, logos at the bottom of the screen. It's always such a joy to work with this team of amazing scientists and communicators. And everyone that's listed here has really contributed a lot into making this panel discussion that we're having today, as well as this whole series, a success. So just wanted to say thank you to our organizers here. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And I'm gonna kick it over to you, Nick, and I'll let you introduce our panelists, and looking forward to the discussion. So the floor is yours, Nick. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. So I just want to really reiterate to start. Oh my head is so big on my screen right now. Hold on a second. I just want to really reiterate to start how awesome this series has been, and really just give a really heartfelt thank you to the organizers. It's really been awesome to see the sort of Eastern Fire Science Exchange Network consortia working together so closely on these things, and also with the assistance of the station CSD team. It's just been a really fantastic success, and I'm really, really happy to be here today. So this workshop or webinar today, I'm just going to read the paragraph that describes this. We'll just start with that. And I don't usually do this, but I think I just want to make sure that everybody here is on the same page of what we're doing. Land management programs are frequently confronted with the imperative of incorporating the most advanced scientific knowledge into their decision-making processes, along with filling voids and research needed to move along effective management. Nevertheless, the persistent disparities between the realms of science and management often impede effective collaboration. In this panel, we will draw on inspiration from successful case studies in the Eastern United States, where land managers and scientists have forged pioneering partnerships yielding tangible advancements in the field. So I think that that's a really interesting statement. And, you know, in my career, I've seen this disjunct in some places, and in other places, I've seen these sort of wonderful successes. And I think that today we really want to highlight some of those success stories and maybe dig into why they happened, how they happened, and talk about how they've built communities around sort of very specific collaborations. So we have three great panelists today. I'm not going to introduce them at length. They're going to do that. So the format here is going to be that each of our panelists is going to give a little bit of an introduction of themselves and a little bit of some background of how they've been involved in this sort of co-production process through their career. And then we will move from that into a sort of a discussion around several topic areas that we've pulled up. We'll also be able to access questions in the chat, and we'll be getting those also. So I encourage, if you have questions sort of in real time, I might be able to incorporate them as we go, and we might circle back to some of them. And if we see more than one person or a thumbs up for a question, we'll sort of give that one a little bit more attention as we move forward. So we have Laurel Case, Lane Johnson, and Joe O'Brien with us today. And to start us out, I'm going to throw this over to Laurel, and she can introduce herself and give her example of science and manager collaboration.
Thanks, Nick. So yeah, my name is Laurel Kays. Really happy to be here. I manage the Fire Learning Network program, which is one of the 4 fire networks. I think they're going to put the website in the chat if you want to learn more about the FLN or those other programs that our team manages together. I'm based out of the Nature Conservancy's North America Fire Unit, remotely via my house in Raleigh, North Carolina. And been with TNC for about 2 years now, and before that was with North Carolina State University Extension Forestry, and worked across the southern region on a variety of prescribed fire-related projects, including helping to coordinate outreach for the Southern Fire Exchange. And I think that is where my sort of example of what good collaboration comes from. But I will say first that I think we're really lucky, to Nick's point about success stories in the Southeast, particularly where I live, to have so many places where science and management come together, to have collaboratives like the FLNs in the mountains, the longleaf groups, the Southern Regional Cohesive Strategy Group, the prescribed fire councils. There's a lot of existing places where these people can come and connect, and it doesn't have to be a one-to-one relationship. And I think that really enables a lot of what we're going to talk about today. And I think the communication around issues with duff and old longleaf trees is really a good example of how all of those things help facilitate good collaboration around science and management. I won't go into what the duff problem is. For those of you non-Southeasterners, you can Google it. There's a lot of wonderful Southern Fire Exchange resources about it. But it is one of those really great examples where managers noticed this thing was happening, that older, larger longleaf, particularly trees, were dying when fire was reintroduced to those areas. They connected with scientists who said, let's look at this, figured out what was going on. They worked together to figure out what management solutions looked like. And throughout that process, organizations like Extension, like SFE is the Regional Fire Science Exchange Network, were integrated and communicating with the broader management and science community about what that looks like through things like webinars, like fact sheets. We did a bunch of workshops that brought out managers who had a lot of experience on this issue and the scientists who had actually done the research together to talk to local managers about the science behind this, the management experience behind this, and help them address that in their local areas. So I think when I think of what successful science and management collaboration looks like, that is always the example that comes to mind.
Awesome. Thank you, Laurel. And so we will move from Laurel over to Joe O'Brien.
Okay, thanks. It's really nice to be here. Appreciate the invitation. My name is Joe O'Brien. I'm the project leader for the Athens Prescribed Fire Science Laboratory, which is part of the Southern Research Station and located in Athens, Georgia, not Athens, Greece. But, just to give you a kind of sketch related to the topic for today, when I first started working, I was hired as a fire ecologist back in 2002. And I had, done my master's on a post-fire ecology study where, I was very wet behind the ears. And the first thing that I did, and I was fortunate that I was given the freedom to do this, was sort of embed myself with the local national forest as part of their fire operations. So I got trained as a firefighter. And my supervisor at the time thought that that was really important. It's hard to study something if you never actually get to see it. And so through that experience, 20 years of acting operationally with the local national forest, it built this sort of, opportunity for observing not only fire management, but how fire behaves in the wild. And we've maintained that sort of model through the development of our fire lab. Most of the scientists working in our unit are fire qualified. They often participate as operational personnel on local prescribed burns, which gives them an introduction to the problems faced by managers, but also gives them insight into how, fire behaves as a biophysical process. So that's sort of where I'll end, because with some of the questions we have, I can give more specific examples. But I think about it kind of like when reporters are embedded with, military operations or just how intelligence is included in, fire suppression teams. You're working side, the intelligence, gathering information, solving problems for managers who don't have time to solve them themselves is really how I see our work. But I'll end there and we'll have more specifics.
Thanks, Joe. Lane, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Lane Johnson. I'm with the University of Minnesota Cloquet Forestry Center, about 30 minutes south of Duluth, Minnesota, where I live. As a research forester here, we're the primary teaching and research forest for the University of Minnesota with the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences. And I guess fresh out of college, I stepped into a seasonal cultural resource management job with U.S. Forest Service, the Superior National Forest. And then I would get laid off in the winter, and it's ended up migrating down into the Missouri Ozarks to do prescribed fire. And I guess I got my, a few years of management related work in, and decided it would be fulfilling for me to apply some of those lessons learned or the curiosities I had from that work to doing tree ring focused research. And I've done that here in northern Minnesota, as well as in the American Southwest in northern New Mexico. And this position at the Cloquet Forestry Center opened up about 6 years ago now, and it was this perfect opportunity for me to kind of step back into a manager role or be in a kind of this research transfer realm where I have got a foot in both the management world and the research world. And I could be applying some of the lessons learned from the interpretation of tree ring based records to fire stewardship on the ground. So this effort at the Forestry Center, we're located on the Fond du Lac Band Reservation, the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and tree ring research that had been conducted here by a colleague of mine, Evan Larson, with University of Wisconsin-Platteville, led to these really great cross-cultural conversations with community members and resource managers with the Fond du Lac Band, and kind of developed a shared understanding that the tree ring fire history records for the university land base are connected to this long history of land tending or place caretaking through fire by the ancestors of the present day Fond du Lac Band. So we've been working over the past couple of years to get fire back onto the ground on the university forest, and been leading to some really fun discussions and on the ground actions that I think have been useful for driving work that's happening elsewhere in northern Minnesota. So I guess I can reflect more on that as we move through the panel discussion.
Great. Thank you all. So I'll maybe contribute a little bit along the way here. So I'll give you guys a little brief background on myself also. Unlike Joe, I started first in fire. So but I wasn't from anywhere at the burn. I'm from Western Pennsylvania, and fire was not a thing here at all. Not that kind of fire anyway. And I somehow had the opportunity to move after my undergraduate work to the New Jersey Pine Barrens. And I should back up. I got ahead of myself. I'm Nick Skoronsky. I'm a research forester and project leader with the Northern Research Station, and I'm based in Morgantown, West Virginia now. We're actually in the process of standing up a fire-focused research work unit in the research station, which is sort of a new thing. We had been sort of piecemeal across the station, and so we're really sort of consolidating our strong fire scientists into this one group. And it's really sort of a group that's based on sort of physical or fundamental fire dynamics mixed with ecology and a little bit of carbon flux and things of that nature mixed in as well. So it's a new unit we're sort of on the upswing right now. But anyway, back to my early career. I got a job at Fort Dix, and as you all know, the military has no shortage of ignitions that happen on their lands. And when you mix that with pitch pine scrub oak ecosystem, it's a very interesting place to be involved in a fire management program. I moved over to the Forest Service as a research technician, and I worked with Ken Clark, who, hi Ken, I see you're on here, and what really kind of had the opportunity to work as a field tech, doing eddy covariance work, which is basically carbon in and out of the ecosystem and water as well. And had the wonderful opportunity to go back to school. So I ended up as a research forester probably 12 or 13 years ago, and have since just sort of followed the trail of fire and really have had, because of my interactions as a fire manager at the installation, have had a wonderful community of folks that I had met, on the fire line, on prescribed fires, on wildfires. And I had the opportunity to really sort of connect with those folks in a way that led to really wonderful collaborative opportunities later on as a research scientist. And so we can kind of get into why I think that might be, but that's my background. And since then, I've been the principal investigator and a co-investigator on many sort of very specific Department of Defense CERTIP projects, looking at sort of fundamental like physical fire behavior, smoke emissions, and things of that nature. So very project-based type work with a lot of intensive field experimentation. So that's me. And without further ado, I kind of want to pivot us into our first topic area. And that is the sort of the question of how can land managers connect with researchers and vice versa, and what makes for a fruitful collaboration for everyone involved. I don't know which one of you guys want to take the first swing at that. I will call on you.
You want me to start?
Go ahead, Joe.
I was trying to hold back. Everybody says I always talk too much. Well, I mean, that's a interesting topic. I think coming from the perspective of an applied scientist, it's obviously nice to have a collaboration that results in a useful outcome in terms of improving management. But really what's also interesting is to be creative and have basic knowledge produced as well as an applied solution to a practical problem. So coming into it, sort of trying to keep an open mind. Yes, this is a research project aimed at solving a specific problem that a resource manager may be having, but then thinking about, okay, how can I leverage this to understand the fundamentals of how something works? And there should be a synergy as well. So there's a synergy scientifically and a synergy in terms of application by the managers. That's sort of a good place to start for me.
Yeah, I think, not to oversimplify the question, but scientists, contrary to popular belief, are people too. And all of the same things that apply in terms of building relationships with any other partner also apply to working with scientists. You have to build trust. You have to have mutual areas of interest. You have to have the resources to make that happen. Obviously, there are some specificities with respect to working with researchers that are different, but I think it does help to sort of bring it back to, they are also people working in an institution with a particular goal, and let's have conversations about the extent to which our goals align and how it makes sense to work together.
I think emphasizing the desire to have equitable exchange of information particularly when working with tribes, but you know, managers and scientists coming together. Everyone has a great knowledge base to bring to collaborative discussions. They have their expertise and place-based experience, and kind of being very vocal about acknowledging that and appreciating what people are able to bring to exploring these management or science-based problems or questions. Super valuable, making people feel like they can contribute in the ways that they know how. And that collaboration, just like actual exchange of information, it happens when folks make it a priority. It doesn't just happen on its organically in many cases, but has to be shaped by people willing to take the time to build relationships, like Laurel said, to be good neighbors in some cases, and prioritizing outcomes over outputs in some ways.
And to the point about how to actually connect, I think, again, that is a place where having these existing collaboratives or groups is really useful. So it doesn't have to be a single manager trying to find a researcher who can answer their question or is willing to come out. That is also can be useful, but I think it is more efficient to have these existing collaboratives where these two groups can go and researchers can hear, oh, it isn't just this one person, 20 different people are having the same question. Maybe I should look at that, and sort of on the other end as well.
You know, I totally agree with both Laurel and Lane, but I found that the personal connection was critical to me in being strategic about, you know, so I started working with the local national forest, then got involved with the leadership of that national forest, then over 10 years where they trusted me, and there's this issue of trust and competence and mutual respect. Then you move up to regional folks or international folks. So, but the personal cannot be understated. You know, that's how you get the initial access to their world. And Lane's point, sort of that you know, not being completely open, completely, you know, sharing information as it comes, and you know, I really feel like when you start that way, you get that mutual respect. There's oftentimes, I've seen it and I've heard it many times on both sides, where there's this, I don't know, the pointy-headed scientists are just a pain. They're trying to micromanage our work. And then there's also, oh, these managers, you know, somebody will give a management recommendation that's based on their particular research perspective that really is impractical. So that personal relationship can avoid some of those pitfalls, I think.
Yeah,
100% agree.
I agree, Joe. I mean, I think, you know, I'm just sort of sitting here thinking like where our successes and where our failures are, you know, in my unit or in my career. And I think we've been scientifically very successful because we've, you know, had that credibility to work on fire lines, and, you know, the credentials to work on fire lines, and, you know, to do that. And I think when you're doing sort of live fire experiments, that's a very important thing. We don't want to be a burden, for sure. We want to be a resource, you know, when we're not working on something else. But there are some things that, you know, getting to like what makes for where I would like to do better or see the science community do better is to listen to what the actual needs are. I mean, and this is just maybe more of a higher level like funding issue. I think that there's these things where I hear folks, you know, in my travels through like the state fire wardens or through section fire wardens or all the way down through, or FMOs, regional fire staff. These are the things that we need. These are the things that are sort of eating our lunch. And it's really frustrating to me sometimes because that's not what I can get funding to work on. I find myself getting, you know, I find myself getting like sort of put in this pigeonhole of where can we chase some dollars to get something done. But then the reality is the things that I think would probably be really beneficial to sort of like regional fire management, like we don't have the talent or the resources to really get after those things. And so like coming together on that issue as well, like, so you have a need, well, how do we find the resources to get at it? Is a thing that I really have been struggling with lately.
And to Joe's point about the importance of relationships, I think when that is a benefit, when you have that relationship and you can express, like, I would also love to look into this. I just can't find the money. So how do we fix that? That can help people from having those pointy-headed scientists sort of perspective.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Lane.
To managers that I have worked with, or I have colleagues that work with, one way that has been I've seen is a beneficial way of getting some work done on the ground with management focused work, research work, just providing a little bit of seed funding. If you got a little bit of money that could be put towards a pilot study, or for just beginning to explore a topic of management interests, that can be a really great way to develop proof of concept as a researcher, or to test out a concept that could be then used to pursue further funding. Finding ways that land managers can support researchers in doing the things that they would really value or benefit from. It doesn't have to be a massive multi-year source of funding, but even get a grad student on a small portion of a project, or to just get out in the field for some researcher manager field trips and exchanges focused on a specific area of interest, can be really, really great for getting some momentum and prioritizing future work together.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had sort of wrote catalysts down too. When I looking at these types of relationships, it usually ends up being one or two people that are really excited about something, and then folks can kind of glom onto that and they get brought along. And I kind of want to transition into our next topic here, which is sort of what fields, there are some fields that are just sort of natural connections. There's natural ways for managers to understand why they should help with that. But then there's other ones that are maybe a little bit more disconnected and sort of lines of research that maybe not be so obvious. And I guess we were talking about maybe how we could get into that a little bit. If you guys have anything to add on that. I have a couple examples myself, but I'm trying not to talk.
Yeah, I mean, you bring that up right at the right time. So when I talk to graduate students, I try to recruit them into fire science. I tell them it's the one field that crosses every discipline that you can think of, from engineering to social science to ecology to chemistry to physics, whatever. You can always find a topic related to wildland fire that will satisfy your core interest and then be applied. And some of these things sound intimidating to managers. For example, fluid dynamics. So we're in this realm now where we need to move beyond the historical fire behavior prediction systems that were based on 1970s technology to more complex models that are built off of fluid dynamics. When you hear fluid dynamics, even I recoil a little bit. You're like, whoa, that's like Calc 19. But the reality is if you think about, fire and the atmosphere as a fluid, you can come up with analogies that are really practical. And what you realize is that fire managers right now are actually practicing fluid dynamics, but they just don't know it. So for example, when you go to a trout stream, or you're a kayaker and you're reading the water flow down the stream, you're looking for eddies, you're looking for places that the fish can hide, or places where you're not going to tip your kayak over. So your brain is practicing fluid dynamics in that situation. And when fire managers know not to light around a corner, or they understand how two fire lines coming together is going to cause an increase in sort of intensity in a place they don't want it, that's fluid dynamics. So translating what is intimidating science to approachable science is something that you can do that with any field. And I think that's exciting, and it's fun to realize that we're all practicing advanced physics and we don't even know it.
I think there's a slightly similar dynamic happening with social science, although I think a little bit different. Every manager is engaging in social science. Every manager is making decisions based on what social license they think they have, what their neighbors think, what their communities think. And I think there is a place where common sense or what we think we know often doesn't align with what social science actually says. I think a lot of Sarah McCaffrey's work is a great example of that a lot of managers just have a lot more, space to play with social license than they may think that they do. So I think that is a place where the science doesn't necessarily directly touch onto the land, but maybe we need to try and be a little bit more connected and get that information to managers, and get more local information to managers so they know what they're actually working with.
Here in Minnesota, I see really robust partnerships between researchers and land managers in the realm of just forestry more generally, and silviculture and wildlife ecology, whether that's birds or charismatic mammals like wolves. And yeah, I think wildlife managers thinking about habitat is fuels, it's fire dependent in many cases, and then likewise foresters in working in fire dependent systems like pine and oak, they're essentially working to mimic or use fire surrogate treatments to promote the values or pursue the goals and objectives that they've set for their stands and their forested landscapes. And so essentially everyone working in these different realms, they are fire managers in a more removed way. But there's, I think, opportunities for fire enthusiastic scientists to sort of insert themselves into some of those collaboratives and indicate that there's room to be doing fire focused work, whether that's biophysical science or social science, and having that making that relevant to the land management community.
So it's been, we do a lot of work with lasers, with ALS, with airborne lasers and terrestrial lasers, and a lot of stuff with, computer models that need like quantum computers to run and things like that. And it just sort of strikes me with, with this sort of topic area, there's this whole other realm of expertise that would be really useful to kind of bring into what we're doing in the fire science community. So basically, basic fire ecologists, I think of those as folks that really like very easily can tie in with like, fire effects research or things like that. And it's very like a very natural bridge. But in some cases, there's this technology aspect out there that's really going to reinvent how we think about fire, how we think about the effects of fire, how we think about where we put treatments, how we attack wildfires, things of that nature. And I mean, I go back to, most of you are probably familiar with LiDAR data now. You've seen pictures of LiDAR and understand what those point clouds look like. And there's this really, the paper just came out a little bit ago, and they put it really well, and I wanted to always write this paper, and someone beat me to it, which is great. But, we used to use a D tape, like DBH tape, and a clinometer. Like those were our tools for estimating like what the three-dimensional structure of a forest is. And when we think about fire, when I think about fire, I don't think about individual trees. When I think about fire spread and behavior, I don't think about individual trees. I think about like the canopy, like what is the density of that canopy? Like how is it connected? Things of that nature. And so we're sort of shifting this paradigm of how we're able to actually sense and measure those things. And, I'm an ecologist. Like I don't have the tools, the mathematical tools to do that stuff. And so I think that sort of coming back to this catalyst idea is that some of us are ingrained, but we can kind of reach across to another field, across the street, and say, hey, you guys, this is really cool. You could add this to what we're doing. And I think that there needs to be sort of some patience with those folks. I just said, you need the credentials to do this work. But the reality is, like, there's some folks that don't have the credentials that if we just sort of steer in the right direction, they'd really be into it. I was just at Carnegie Mellon University a couple of weeks ago, And there's a PhD student who like started his own like fire lab in a robotics department that does like work for like Google and Apple. And I went and saw their presentations, and it was amazing. The stuff that I mean, they're basically taking pictures or drone videos of like flaming of a fire, and then they're taking the smoke out of the picture. Like, and then they can reconstruct the smoke. And so you just have this like volumetric smoke plume. I mean, that's pretty cool. We couldn't, like traditional fire scientists couldn't do that. And so I think that there's this need to pull those other disciplines in and see what they can do. You know, mathematicians, just thinking about AI applications for what we're doing. I think that there's like, we all know where it's going, and I think we need to get on the train and bring those folks along with us too.
Mhm. And get them out on the fire line too. Like fire is cool and fun, and for researchers who spend a lot of time staring at computers, which can also be fun for some people, but it's a good argument if you can say, hey, why don't you come out with me for a day and we'll go wander around the woods and set some stuff on fire.
That's critical, Laurel. We just had the modelers from Lanel, Los Alamos, out on the fires that we were doing down at Fort Stewart, and you know, we knew that this was important, and that's sort of our relationship with Los Alamos. The big brains out there don't need us for anything except access to fires, but they were amazed, and they said they could already see from just observing an aerial ignition from being able to stand on the fire line ways they were going to alter their code to more realistically capture, because they'll create a fantasy world if left to their own devices. But Lane mentioned cross-disciplinary, everybody did. That's so important. And this concept of silos doesn't work in fire, because if a silvicultural team goes through and does a thinning, that's going to affect the distribution of fuels for the subsequent fire. So like the kind of work that Nick's doing with being able to characterize forest structure and being able to tie it to fuels, we call it the ecology of fuels, but it's this bridge between fire management and forest management and silvicultural management that we need to expand on. We've got the technology now. It's funny, the fuels people are more interested in what's left behind, and the foresters are more interested in what's being taken out. But we got to get that conversation so that when they light the next fire, it's going to do what both the foresters and the ecologists want to have happen. So it's awesome, and that's where we're at now. It's pretty exciting. We have the technology. We've got the realization that we need to work together. We just need we need about 10,000 more people to do it.
Awesome. I like that topic.
Yeah, it was a good one.
I feel like we're moving on. Yeah. So yeah, Joe, that's a really good point. Is this like funding? I always think, this is a little bit off topic, but I always think about like the investment that we make in certain things. And I've always been curious, like, what has the actual investment been made in this work? Our friend Bob Kremens always says we need to have like a Manhattan Project for fire, and that kind of focus into this. And we just sort of have these like disparate groups that are out doing these things. But like, if we could all come together as like a big team, we could probably do a lot more,
There's an interesting paper that was in Science that said like small teams innovate, large teams solve problems. So, in a way, what's happening now with the work that we're doing with the Eastern Innovation Landscape Network is sort of, to me, almost a perfect flying under the radar. Gives you freedom to fail and to innovate. Once, sometimes if you've got too much money, there's too much scrutiny. So, so there's this middle ground, but then once you figure it out, you're right. We need a Manhattan Project to, if we're supposed to be burning 20 times as many acres by prescribed fire, it's just, we need some kind of significant investment to make that happen. Not that I said that on recording and I work for the Forest Service, but separation of powers and all, but that's me as a citizen speaking my mind.
Thanks for clarifying. Okay. So our next question is, and I want to add something to this, but I'll start with this one. So how can land managers support more research in their region?
It's a very big, broad question.
Well, you know, I mean, I would flip it around. I would say oftentimes the managers are very receptive to potential interactions with researchers, but researchers either don't know how to like sort of enter that world, or maybe it's not a motivation, especially for certain university researchers, for example, are often more motivated by NSF style projects than applied science type project. That's not completely true, but I would just you know, it goes back to personal, you know, that's what it came down to for me, was like, you know, who's the local FMO for the local national forest? Drive down there, introduce myself. You know, somebody's got to make a first attempt, but the work that the networks do is really critical for that too, because then, you know, then it's not just like you're randomly contacting people, you can build a relationship. But that is a, you know, it's up to the researcher as much as the manager, and finding that common ground is key.
And taking advantage of the opportunities to give information up the chain of what you actually need. Like, no one wants to fill out another survey, but when, for example, the exchange networks send theirs out, I think mostly annually, being like, what are your research priorities? That does get seen by people who are funding those research priorities. So picking and choosing, again, no one wants to take another survey, but picking and choosing those sort of opportunities where you can actually express, hey, this is what I need, to someone who might be able to influence that as a manager. It's helpful.
Going back to the kind of the theme we were touching on before with just taking time to develop personal relationships, finding ways to provide seed funding for projects that I think need to be prioritized. The fire science exchanges are an awesome way for scientists and managers to connect on specific topics. In 2018, we co-hosted a fire history tour with the Fond du Lac Forestry and Fire Program with the Lake States Fire Science Consortium. And we had a really good turnout, like 80 folks. It was a chance to get people out to tree ring based fire history sites on the university property, and get feedback from fire managers and other folks that have strong fire programs, like what the potential is for doing fire restoration work on the university property where we hadn't had a fire program in place just a few years ago. And that led to all kinds of great feedback about, yeah, how to do the work, the nuts and bolts of getting units set up, and how to prep around fire scarred red pine that have lots of litter and duff at the base, how to who to be working with in the management realm to get collaborative fire done, and sources of funding, and how to prepare memorandums of understanding. So that's just like a local example of how awesome these field-based conversations and working through your local exchange can be for learning new things and building those relationships.
And there's a good comment in the chat to Lane's point that I think also makes a good point of, like, if that sort of collaborative doesn't exist in your area, start getting people together, because having those existing groups where science and management come together that's an easier way to start to build that relationship than having to like cold call someone or happen to run into someone at a conference or something like that. Having those existing collaboratives where those groups both find value and already come together is important in starting the basis of the relationship that is ultimately going to be the thing that takes work forward.
There's a line in the chat as well about refreshers, and lately with both Fish and Wildlife in Region 5 and U.S. Forest Service Region 8, we've been asked to give some presentations at RT 300, which is the Burn Boss refresher, which is a really good opportunity to make connections. But then just real quick, I think for me, the most effective approach has still been identifying sort of local key players. I can't work with every single national forest in the Southeast. It's accident of geography. I work with the Chattahoochee Oconee. They're both in Georgia, but I've got this 20-year relationship with them. From the get-go, I've told them I'm your fire scientist on call. When somebody comes with, you know, a boutique burning request from some particular wildlife management perspective that's going to really crush their program, and I'm able to, you know, basically be like an attorney on retainer and come in and say like, okay, let's look at this problem. How can I help? And that personal relationship thing. And then, you know, that acts as a model for other, you know, managers in the region. They can't, there's only one of me and there's only one of Nick and one of Lane and one of Laurel, but we can have these templates that can expand, clone. We need to clone.
And Joe and Nick, I wonder like what you think of this. Like, should managers, if you're trying to forge a relationship with researchers, like, should you look for the younger folks, like the research assistants, those people who don't have like the 20-year depth of relationship that Joe does, that he's already working for? Like, is that more likely to get you somewhere and be able to build that relationship versus someone who's more advanced in their career and just has 10,000 emails they're getting every day?
Well, I think that it can be a combination of both. I mean, I think that reaching out, you know, Joe and I were just talking before. I have a postdoc opportunity, everybody. I have a postdoc opportunity. I can discuss it later if you'd like. Doing really cool stuff with Firebrands and Smoke. But, you know, I think that, you know, as we get more advanced in our careers, we have broader networks. And I think that if you had a question, I think you could start by reaching out to somebody, you know, and I don't think you should be intimidated by anybody. I mean, you can just send us an email, and oftentimes we know of people that are looking for a specific task or thing. And there's oftentimes where it's, I mean, let's face it, in the Eastern United States, there's not very many like fire science programs. And so a lot of times, you know, we can identify a student that's in a completely different program, and we can sort of guide them along the fire prep path. I mean, my PhD program did not have a fire ecology emphasis or anything like that, but I was able to go down that road. And I think that we have the time to sort of guide them and to seed them, you know, and to push them in the right direction. And it just takes the right, really interested and motivated individual to make a big change and to sort of grow into the person that someone's calling to start that conversation. So I think that both, right? And I think that there's the question in there about seed funding for a study or for a question. And I think, you know, depending on the sort of career stage of the scientist, it wouldn't take that much to get them going. It might just be that you're interested in the question, and they might have funding or some resources to sort of to start a seed study. I would say that the second best thing is, you know, a master's student or something like that. That would be a way to get that moving. And maybe that doesn't answer the question, but
No, I agree with Nick. I think it's both. I think, you know, if you're lucky enough to find somebody early in their career that, you know, wants to partner with you, go for it. And like Nick said, there's just not a lot of us. So we all try to do as much as we can, but I think that's an excellent, I mean, co-production, which is the theme of this, really requires like a pairing of operational people and research people. So yes, I would encourage everyone to try and find whatever connection. And in many ways, you know, as you get further along in your career, you actually have a little bit more freedom to reach out to something that you might not have the time or energy to do earlier, believe it or not. It's a different kind of world that you enter. So, and like Nick said, we can often encourage people either that we work with directly or indirectly, like, hey, this, you know, you just got to get your need broadcast and hope that somebody picks it up.
Yeah, I love the broadcast word. I was thinking about casting a wide net, and you don't necessarily know who has the capacity at a given time or who has the interest. So yeah, being being vocal about what your needs and interests are, and being unapologetic about asking people for help. Like, I think some of this, like co-production, co-management, co-stewardship, co-research, it requires a little bit of humility and being willing to admit that you don't know everything, and that other people, your successes may be contingent a little bit on what other people can bring to a relationship, or a potential collaboration. So yeah, I think it's great to not worry so much about who has capacity, who has the time, but yeah, just making offers.
I'm much more likely to answer an email from a manager than any kind of like bureaucrat. So,
Yeah.
Joe O'Brien, U.S. Forest Service. by the
oh,
way.
I mean, foreign bureaucrats. I don't know.
Yeah, so another way David put it in the chat, but there's a bunch of, and there was a question in the chat that was basically, or a suggestion in the chat that the RT-130, which is the refresher course for firefighters, could incorporate some sort of science into it. And I agree, it could definitely do that. That there's sort of, that's like a system type thing that is out of our hands, right? Like that's like that course comes down from above, and that's not the greatest place, I don't think, to do that. I think that David's suggestion for these prescribed fire council meetings, 10 years ago or when I started my career, Pennsylvania didn't really burn at all, like at all. And every year they have a prescribed fire council meeting. And, there's like 300 people that show up to this meeting at State College every year. It was like mind boggling to me. Like Jersey, and this isn't a knock on anybody, it's just they just do things differently, but they've been burning for almost 100 years in the same organization. And they don't have that type of like bigger group picture of like what's going on. So it's really cool, like what those sort of groups of folks are doing. And I would suggest, like, if you're a member of one of those groups, I do the Northeast Cohesive Strategy. There's scientists that sit on that. There's managers, there's policymakers, there's the whole gamut of folks. But that's a really wonderful place to sort of bring a scientist in and to say, like, can you just give a talk? I mean, I gave a talk there 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm still like, there's probably 3 little seed projects that started from that. And those are really good times and places to sort of invite folks. All right, so there's a couple questions that have been coming across in the chat, and I think we can try to hit those. Nicole asked, how can collaborations be fruitful in the West, where fire seasons are longer and hotter than the past? And let's just focus on the front end. Let's just talk about how can collaborations be fruitful, even in areas where it might be a little bit more difficult to do that. Maybe we can attack that question that way. And I'll just say, none of us are Western folks. I'll put a really big plug in for, the Fire Science Exchange Network is a really good place to start, as a basis of where to look for those types of collaborations and to make those connections. That's another really good place to go, obviously. But just to sort of give some credence to that question. Do you guys have anything else? I mean, I am not a Western. I don't have very much knowledge of what's going on over there.
No, me either. But that doesn't mean we don't have potentially useful inputs. And we've this is going towards sort of more Forest Service centric conversations, but we've often talked about how do we take the successes from the East and figure out ways to translate them to the West. And it's a big topic, but it seems like an area that could be fruitful. And it's hard to know exactly where to start, but just every year in the Southeast, there's all these modules that come through from the West to get their ink in their task books for firing boss, for example. And so there's already this potential for more deeper collaborations between East and West. But it's a tough one because we have big, even though we're doing pretty well in the Southeast, we've got to do more. And so we all have our own local problems that are obviously on the top of our list, but we do need to figure out ways to cross that big old muddy Mississippi.
We have quite a few FLNs in the West, and I don't think it's that different in terms of collaboration. There are differences, but the core of like what it looks like to work together still pretty true in the West as it is in the East. I think one of the big differences in the collaboratives that I see that are more successful are ones where the large land management agencies, particularly Forest Service, either own somewhat less land and therefore are inherently more willing to accept more people at the table, or the local folks on that forest or BLM land or what have you are willing to do that because they just understand that that's what needs to happen. I think it is a benefit we have here in the East that our collaboratives, our collaborations are on a little bit more equal footing because we have just more people involved. We have more private land, we have more diverse land ownerships. And so I think in the West, a thing that has to be overcome sometimes is those federal agencies being willing to come to the table as an equal partner, even if they own more land and have more power, and be willing to hear those other voices and, you know, and be there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the diversity of the land ownerships in the East really kind of lend it to some agencies being good at some things, other agencies being good at other things, and then sort of coming together to do that one thing that benefits both or all, you know, and that's a really cool contrast. I'd also say, I just want to kind of get back to that question, just the backside of that question about, I mean, basically climate change effects on wildfire, or, you know, 100 years of you know, the put the fire out by noon policy. Like, so things are changing, and those are really good places for collaborative work to happen. You know, that's like a whole nother frontier of how we understand fire management and fire scientists or science. So, I mean, understanding like what the novel fuel types that we're going to have in the future, how do those burn differently? How do we manage those things? So there's a lot of questions that exist even that way. Brett asked, how do we create better alignment between research funding and addressing pressing management relevant questions? And what are the challenges to that? So basically, how do we marry the on the ground needs to the basic, whatever the funding agencies are putting out at that time? How do we do that?
That's where managers can help, you know, by contacting the boards, you know, and this is like, that's a big ask too. Like, you got to find out who the board is, or, you know, but I mean, it's most of these things are driven by users, not scientists. And so, you know, finding out or figuring out how to let your needs be known up your own personal chain of command, or, you know, I don't know, writing joint fire science and saying, you need this, or, you know, it's really driven by the user community, I would argue, to a large extent, from most of the places I go anyways. I don't know, Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, sometimes it's like politically, like so far above our heads. I always come back to bringing people into the field, you know, and just to go back to the example of Fort Stewart the last couple of weeks, you know, just as one example that I'm very familiar with, you know, the DoD environmental research sort of funding program. You know, they have a technical advisory board that sits, and they basically evaluate like what statements of needs they're going to put out, where they're going to invest their money, and they, like, it is a what's it called when Congress like appoints a board? You know, I'm sorry. So there's some board, like the management of federal dollars is sort of limited to Congress, and in some rare occasions they'll basically appoint a board, and they'll put people on the board and allow them to sort of make direct input into how the funding is spent. And so last week, you know, and this week, that technical committee came to Fort Stewart and witnessed the research that was going on. They witnessed the management that was going on. They heard directly from land managers, from fire managers to foresters. There was an archaeologist that spoke there, and really let those folks kind of tell their story and invested their time to go out and actually see what was going on the ground. And I think that those kind of like that facilitation is not, I don't think, very common, but those are the types of things that, you know, sometimes as a scientist, you're like, oh man, like this, we hosted one of these in New Jersey a couple months ago, and it was really stressful. It took a lot of our time, but in the end, you know, those are the kind of things that really pay off, is working that message up the chain of command and seeding those things.
And I think trying to get better at communicating about how research projects that are not necessarily super sexy or have like immediate outcomes that we can put out and see, we spent X dollars, we got this out of it within 2 years. Communicating about the ways that those projects lay the groundwork for really important good work in the future is also really important, because the nature of the world we live in is that people want to fund things so that they can, within the next couple years, you know, put out a press release and say, see, we did this thing, we did it. And, you know, figuring out how to bridge that is important.
What I've noticed over time is that like scientists feel like they do science, and it's not their role to be involved in advocacy or in making policy recommendations, particularly in like politically sensitive arenas. And same goes for managers. Like, I'm a manager, I got to do these things, focus on my sphere of influence, and they're not necessarily reaching out to policymakers, or they're not necessarily advocating for their management needs at a higher level. And I think we can all collectively do a better job of being advocates for the things that we care about, reaching out to our local legislators and communicating what these needs are, getting our concerns and our successes out into public forums, you know, newspapers or local radio, and talk about these challenges more openly. And that can over time, I think, help shape the future trajectory of fire science, fire management, locally and nationally.
All right, here's another question from the chat. What are some ways to introduce fire education / prescribed burns to a community that's been in fact impacted by fire? There's a lot of trauma and fear about fire. What we're thinking of involving some tribes or different organizations. Any resources that you can recommend?
That's that is dicey, and I often catch myself, because my research focuses on fire as a creative force. Fire is a keystone biophysical process that's missing, that the lack of fire is a bigger disturbance than the fire itself. But then you have to remember that in certain situations there's tragedy fires, and there's a real risk of human, danger and loss, and so that one's, I just personally, I have to always remind myself to remember that there might be somebody in the audience, that was tragically affected by a fire. So, I don't know any resources, but just I often have to caution myself to like slow down a little when I'm sending this message of, yeah, we need more fire. Fire's good. But as for any specifics, maybe Laurel knows, I don't know.
Yeah, I cannot give you a specific like website, but I will say there are a lot of trainings and resources that I see being circulated about like trauma-informed communication, storytelling, what have you, in the fire community because of exactly this issue, and seeking out something like that. And some of them are pretty short. You're not going to be an expert, but it'll give you some things to keep in mind when you're communicating, especially if you're in a place where you have a large community of people who have lost homes or even lost people that they cared about. I think also to the tribal piece, tribal partners can be really, really great communicators about that. And I think we have to be careful that we're not seeking out tribal partnerships so that they can say something we want them to say for us. Yeah. It needs to be a partnership. And then if they're interested in being part of that communication, that's great. But being careful that we're not going and, seeking out tribal partners and saying, hey, it'd be great to work together. And by work together, I mean, I have a script for you that I would like you to tell these people.
Wonder about ways that communities can be exposed to fire in a low stakes way that it helps them maintain comfort. So here in northern Minnesota, we've got long winters, oftentimes along even with snow cover, and it's this great opportunity to be doing pile burning, and it's super safe, a super great way to prep sites for future prescribed fire, and it's a way to get community members out, or fire curious people out into the woods, interacting with fire and understanding how the fuels environment shapes fire behavior and fire effects. And then it ultimately can be a situation where people walk away like, oh, that was much different than how I imagined it would be. There's this level of comfort with the control that winter pile burning offers, and I think of pile burning as this gateway drug for folks that maybe haven't been exposed to prescribed fire in the past. They experience something like that and feel empowered and more aware of how fire works in these systems. And then it could be a way to kind of promote or build community or fire advocates in your local community through those kind of learning experiences.
Yeah, to that point, you know, this isn't going to be appropriate everywhere, but in the East, Southeast, we have a lot of like learn and burn events or fire festivals or fire demonstrations, opportunities to get people out and see, usually on a very small scale, what prescribed fire looks like, and that it is safe, and that there's a lot of people, and you know, all of that sort of stuff. And I think that can, to Lane's point, be a really great way not only to show people what this thing really looks like, that it's not just people like running around the woods throwing matches and seeing what happens, but also, you know, embracing some of the like fun, joyful parts that makes fire a thing that we care about, and, you know, showing that it doesn't have to be this scary thing. And again, I think that would have to look different in places, you know, a lot of places in the West that have had like a deeper trauma with fire, but maybe looking into some of those resources about fire festivals, learn and burns, and thinking through what it could look like to do that in your community in a way that would be beneficial.
You know, one thing that I was just approached by somebody from Colorado was to use quickfire in some of our sort of state-of-the-art modeling tools as sort of a way to show that, just what you said, we're thinking very deeply about how we're going to apply fire, and we're trying to develop state-of-the-art science to make sure that that outcome is positive. And so like having scientists show that like it isn't just a willy-nilly thing, that there's a lot of thought that goes into how, where, when, why you're burning, burn prioritization models, quickfire, some of these other tools, even if they're still kind of being developed, can be useful to show like we're putting a lot of effort into the science behind igniting a fire, even though we're a little bit behind the curve because of all the energy put into putting out fires. We're catching up.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the topics that we had listed was sort of where are the sort of engagements, or what, I'm gonna put it in the chat. I'm managing Windows here. You know, tribes came up in that question, and Laurel did a really great job of talking through that a little bit. But where are the connections between science and management with tribes in the East? Sort of what's that look like, and how do we push that forward, or what do we do in the future there? It's like, it's something that I think about a lot, but it's kind of a sensitive thing too for me, you know, as a scientist or as a person, you know, how to sort of approach those types of questions. I've had the really nice opportunity. The Forest Service, the Northern Research Station recently hired a tribal relations specialist, Jen Ballinger, and she's awesome. And she's really been helpful to sort of try to like flesh those relationships out. You know, working with, like, I've been working with the Sioux tribe on the UP and really, you know, trying to figure out how we can interchange with them and help them with some burning that they're doing on the Hiawatha National Forest, and just sort of like, how does that work? It's been a really interesting thing. And, you know, it, with so many of the tribes being removed, that, you know, in the West, it seems like such a natural connection that folks are able to make, but in the East, like, how do we do that? What should we be doing? What's the sort of the role of researchers and managers in that process?
So we have a pretty active program with the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation and the Seminoles and the Choctaw. And the Choctaw are working through the EILN as part of that partnership. But one thing that's been critical for me is to partner with social scientists, because that is not my realm of expertise. And there is a lot of, there's different ways of approaching questions. And there's somebody said something before about being humble. There's also just being sensitive to things that I might not even be aware of when engaging with, you know, peoples who've experienced, you know, 300 years of colonization and some of the issues that come from that. So that's been really helpful for me in expanding my worldview and also just building bridges between these nations. So, you know, partnering with people who are experts and social science has been really key for me.
I think there's exciting examples of partnerships across the Eastern region. Here in northern Minnesota, the Superior National Forest has a new memorandum of understanding with 1854 treaty area tribes, which includes the Fond du Lac Band, but also Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, and Bois Forte Band of Chippewa. And I think they're just in the infancy of developing these different types of management partnerships, whether that's related to climate change adaptation and assisted migration in the silvicultural realm, but also with fire and fuels management, whether that's for moose habitat or for reducing fire risk for vulnerable communities. Likewise, the Chippewa National Forest has a co-stewardship agreement with the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe that it's been really fascinating to see established and rolled out for the past few years. And then connected to that, there's the Northern Research Station and the Cutfoot Experimental Forest. They're doing some work related to blueberry monitoring wild blueberry productivity in sites that are where prescribed fire is being reintroduced. So there's great potential all over the place. Again, with the right people coming to the table. And I think one thing I've noticed through the work here on Fond du Lac Reservation between the university and Fond du Lac, like that fire may not always be like the number one priority. It could be in some ways like very like not even a thought, right? There's so many other things the tribes have been dealing with or are dealing with because of the effects of colonization and types of Indian policy that have been put in place going back generations. So thinking about what types of values or concerns these different communities do have, whether that's related to language revitalization or job creation and like the local economy, revitalization of like first foods. There's so many different ways that we can be looking at something that maybe is not related to fire and then realize that we can there's a community interest here that we can connect to fire science and fire management in a creative way. And so that opens this whole new realm of opportunities for collaborative discussion, collaborative implementation down the road.
My colleague Mary Huffman, who coordinates the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network, always talks about how she tries to approach working with tribes as how can I be useful versus how can I be helpful? Like, how can I get you where you want to be versus feel like I am doing the right thing? Like Tulane's point about the sort of priorities, like there's a tribe here in Eastern North Carolina that I think the TNC state chapter is starting to work with, and they want to manage for sassafras. That's an important, cultural plant for them. We don't manage for sassafras, like what does that look like? It's a very different thing than partnering with sort of another white dominant mainstream land management organization. I know it's hard because of capacity and time and restraints on all sides, but I think in the East, we need to figure out how to do a better job of working with forcibly removed tribes on whose ancestral lands we're working. That's really hard for a lot of reasons, but I think if we take seriously that this is their ancestral land and that they live in Oklahoma now, like what does that look like to build those relationships and get those folks more connected to their heritage and to their lands.
And in the Southeast, one things that fits into this whole sort of realm is like trying to get fire back into the hands of people, like trying to undo the industrialization of fire. Like you don't have to have yellow shirt and an engine to light a fire. And that's been a big focus on the work with the Eastern Band of the Cherokee, is like rekindling and rebuilding. There's been so much fire exclusion in the Southern Appalachians for so long that some of the even cultural knowledge has been lost, and like sort of getting fire back into the hands of the people on the ground who are going to use it and need it for whatever their reasons are. And that extends to across, any particular group. We're worried, like we have this culture of fire in the South that is that we would take for granted, but it's definitely not, with the changes in society and the loss of sort of the rural fire user, it's not going to be there forever if we're not careful. But that's been a big focus of us, is like, how do we get people, to be able to feel comfortable enough and have the tools that they need to use fire without having an industrial organization backing them up.
Thanks, guys. That was great. So we're gonna wrap up here, but I would like to give everybody 30 seconds, all the panelists, to have your parting shot, or sort of a last message maybe you didn't get out, or something of that nature. We'll start with Lane. Lane went last every time, so he started.
Yeah, we're talking about a lot of big ideas, and I think it's easy to be overwhelmed or like overthink some of the things that we're talking about. And someone that I respect, who I've had the benefit of working with over the past few years, just said, like, let's stop talking about it and do the work. And you may not have all the answers. You may not know necessarily the right way to approach certain tribal community members or scientists that you're hoping to partner with, or maybe you're a scientist and you don't know enough about how to actually implement fire, but that's why these partnerships are so critical, and why these kind of proactive opportunities to relationship build can be so important and fun, is just like learning by doing. Mm-hmm. and then sharing both your successes and failures with others, so that we can all be building off of what's working well, and also those areas where we fail as well.
Laurel or Joe?
Scientists are people too, and building relationships between managers and scientists are building relationships, and create the venues for those people to come together and to have regular communication and to have fun I think that we talked about prescribed fire council meetings. The happy hour after ours is always the best part, and not just because there's a beer or two, but because people are having fun, and that's the core of relationships, and also a really important part of fire and why it's a cool space to work in. Yeah, and just, doing our best to build those relationships, to create systems that incentivize building those relationships so that it doesn't have to be someone going and emailing and trying to get an answer. There's already people that they know, there's already places that they can go.
Yeah, I would say for the managers, don't hesitate to reach out and contact somebody who is working in an area where you think you need help. Finding those areas is sometimes, or finding those people can be tricky. So reach out to the prescribed fire councils and the FLNs and the consortia, et cetera, et cetera. And Google Scholar is a good way to type in your question and find, probably nothing will come back, but it's a good resource to find people working on a specific topic that you're looking for. But then more for the researchers on this call, it's like we all have to do a better job of understanding the world that managers are living in. We all, I read, Frontiers in Ecology and Environment, and they have a section called management recommendations. I'm like, that should be crossed off. Ecologists should not be making management recommendations. They don't understand the authorities that managers work under. They don't understand the constraints, and maybe we rephrase it somehow, but we really got to do a better job of getting our heads as applied scientists in the worlds that managers live in. Otherwise, we're not going to be relevant, and we're going to lose credibility. So, credibility is everything. So get to know your managers, develop a relationship, however you want to do it, but it's got to happen.
Awesome. So I'll just end this. So looking back through my time as a fire person, I want to just sort of emphasize how awesome it is that we are at where we're at today, as far as the cohesive strategy groups, the prescribed fire councils, the FLNs, the fire science exchange networks. This community has grown so much and is working together so much better than it ever has, that I can't help but be very encouraged with what I see for the future as far as this goes. And I'm really excited to see where it goes. I mean, there's folks on this call. It's so intimidating to sort of see you all there. There's so much potential for the future. And so that's just sort of my view of a 22-year Forest Service employee, of how much change has happened in that short amount of time. And I'm really excited for the future. So I want to thank our panelists. You guys did a great job. It was really easy. You made it easy. Thank you very much for that. You guys had so much good insight. I want to thank our facilitators. You guys rock. You all know that I think you rock, and I hope that you can feel it again today. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And so I'm going to throw this over to Andrea, and she's going to take us home.
Thank you so much. What a great way to close out this season's panel discussions. Joe, I loved your closing comments. I really took that to heart. So yeah, I just want to say thank you to each of our panelists. Really appreciate your time and for sharing your insights. And Nick, right back at you. I think the world of you. Thank you so much for artfully moderating today's discussion. It went really well. Also to all of our participants for submitting questions in advance and for the active dialogue in the chat. I know that sometimes just having these be like a conversation that you're eavesdropping in on can be can inhibit sometimes that dialogue and open discussion that we're all craving. So really appreciate that engagement in the chat to try to provide that opportunity in that space for that conversation. So just a reminder that recordings of this and all of our panel discussions are up on the Fueling Collaboration website. We try to turn these around pretty quickly. So the recording for this one should be up within just a couple of days. And a few notes that at the end of this meeting, everyone here will be automatically directed to an evaluation. We really use these evaluations. We look at them closely, and they guide our future discussions and how we craft these conversations. So just ask you to please take a couple of minutes to respond to that evaluation. And then also next week sometime, you should be receiving a final survey asking about this overarching series. We've been doing Fueling Collaboration now for 4 seasons. This is our last discussion for season 4. We're looking to launch for season 5. And so we'd really like to hear from you what you like, what you don't like, what topics you would like to see us cover in next season. And so you will be getting, again, an evaluation that should be hitting your email sometime next week that will ask a few questions on the overarching series. And so we do ask that you please respond to that. And with that, that's a wrap. Just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for your time. This has been great. Really appreciate it.